Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Rafael Grom. I'm an assistant professor of media studies at the University of Toronto. Welcome to another DigiLabour book talk, the second of the year. Today, we will talk with Robert Dorschel, assistant professor in digital sociology at the University of Cambridge, about his new book, The Social Codes of Tech Workers, Class Identity and Digital Capitalism, just published by MIT Press, and the collection on labor and technology edited by Winfred Poster by Labor Tech Research Network. So we'd like to welcome here Robert Dorschel. Hello, Robert. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for the invitation. Really excited for the discussion.
Excellent. We'll have two discussants for like questions, comments, provocations after Robert's talk, which are Lena Wright. Lena Wright is a PhD student at University of Toronto at the Faculty of Information, and Kenzo Soares Seto from Yale University. Kenzo is a research associate and postdoc fellow at the Information Society Project at Yale. Hello, Lena. Hello, Kenzo.
Hello, thanks for having us here, Raphael.
Yeah, thanks again. It's a great opportunity.
Excellent. Robert, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'll now present my book. Maybe a few words how I got to writing this book. I guess since studying sociology and political science, I've been interested in the middle class. And then when I did my master's, I started noticing that there was some kind of shift in the labor market segment. I noticed friends applying for tech jobs. I took a class in this data science master program at Duke University where, aspiring data scientists told me about their kind of career track and the career opportunities that the tech industry holds for people like them. And so I started noticing there's something going on in the labor market segment. This is the kind of 2017, 2018 period. And so kind of noticing these trends in my life and then looking at the academic literature, I noticed there was a certain discrepancy in the sense that
I think Robert freeze. We lost Robert. Let's
the academic literature.
you are back, Robert.
I'm back. Okay, sorry about
Yeah.
that.
No
Okay.
worry.
So let me know if it happens again. Okay, so I
Yeah.
was just saying, I noticed a certain discrepancy between between changes in the labor market segment around me and kind of the academic literature being very focused on highly precarious digital workers. So I would argue that even up until today, the digital labor debate concentrates on highly precarious workers like gig and crowd workers. And there have been an array of really fascinating and interesting studies on these low paid, often tightly surveilled labor market groups. However, if we want to gain a relational understanding of work and class and how both of those are changing in digital capitalism, then I would argue we need to also turn our attention to the middle layers of digital capitalism, of the digital economy. We need to study the well-paid data scientists, software programmers, UX designers, AI engineers, product managers, machine learning engineers, and so on. We need to study their work, their subjectivities, their class formation in order to gain a more holistic account of what's happening in the labor market. And yeah, there have been pioneering studies, but I'd argue that especially in the last 5 to 10 years, there has the attention really focused on if you like Marxist terms, on the digital proletariat rather than the digital middle class. But who are these tech workers? Who is this? Who is this emerging, growing middle class fraction? So in the book, I define them as the professionals responsible for programming, designing and managing the digital technologies that increasingly shape our societies, that permeate social space. And tech workers can be considered professionals in the sense that they have managed to secure a rather privileged task jurisdiction. They have managed to secure this domain in the world of work that grants them, in return for their labor power, their expertise, relatively high salaries, and a good degree of work autonomy. And tech workers have managed to do this through certain educational training, but also through certain cultural codes, through certain subjectivities that I'll talk about. And so in the book, I argue that due to their specific task jurisdiction, tech workers can be considered to command inscription power, meaning that they possess the expertise through which digital technologies are rendered, are coded, are programmed, are designed, are brought to life. And through this technological expertise that grants them this inscription power, they have been able to accumulate middle, even upper middle class salaries. So the tech workers I interviewed in the US and Germany, in the US, they had average salaries of $140,000 a year. In Germany, they had 80,000 euros roughly a year on average. Yeah, so that shows you this is kind of an upper middle class segment. Of course, there's outliers in both directions, but typically, I argue we can consider these professionals who identify as workers, interestingly, these professionals to occupy upper middle class positions. But they're not just technologically and economically influential. I'd argue they're also symbolically influential. They are one of the few rising, one of the few growing, one of the few prospering middle class fractions in post-Fordist economies in the global north. Now, it's a different story in the global south, where we're generally seeing a growing middle class. Yet in the global north, arguably, in post-Fordist, post-industrial economies, there has been a general decline of the middle class, a certain squeeze of the middle layers, and tech workers present an exception to that trend. Tech workers, I'd argue, can be considered the winners of neoliberalism. They can be considered, as one of the few occupational groups that still allow you to buy a house in Toronto or allow you to buy a house in London or in Berlin. They're one of the few avenues you can take to secure a relatively comfortable middle class way of life by simply building and relying on your labor power. So given this specific class position, I think they're an interesting group to study, and specifically maybe because they occupy this contradictory class location. They are in between the slim elite of tech entrepreneurs and venture capitalists on the one hand, and then highly precarious gig and crowd workers on the other hand. So that raises the question, how do tech workers navigate this contradictory class location? Now, I also want to make a contribution with this book to broader debates in the social sciences. That's why in the book, I spend quite a lot of time introducing these two ideal types of subjectivity. So if my book is limited to really the global north and specifically to two post-Fordist economies in the global north. But if we look at the literature around post-Fordist economies and Fordist economies and ideal forms of subjectivity, I argue that we can identify two ideal types of middle-class subjectivity. So in industrial Fordist capitalism, this was the organizational self. This was a self that was mostly a male and white subject, and it was a self that was that traded their disciplined labor power in return for regular wage increases, for stable and secure employment conditions. So this was a self that often worked in one company or two companies for all their lives, and that favored a certain sense of collectivity and stable belonging. And if we follow the social scientific literature, this self is superseded, is transformed into an entrepreneurial self, starting in the 1970s and then really taking off in the 1980s, where hand in hand with post-industrialization, not just as an effect of post-industrialization, but really hand in hand with that transformation of capitalism, we're seeing this more entrepreneurial self take center stage among white-collar workers. This is a self that favors flexibility over stability. It's a self that favors networks over lifelong communities. It's a self that accepts more deregulated and less stable employment conditions in return for the promise of autonomy, creativity, and self-fulfillment. So it's a self that's more market-oriented. It is a self that's also been coined a neoliberal subject, in the sense that it's a holistically market-oriented self, constantly striving to optimize its life chances and its position in society. So my basic question, my broader theoretical question in this book is, we turn to digital capitalism and its kind of its carrier group, its digital middle class. Does this theoretical diagnosis concept of the entrepreneurial self, does that still hold, or are we seeing a transformation yet again? So to pursue this empirical and theoretical interest in the book, the book is builds on 52 interviews I did with tech workers in the US and Germany between 2020 and 2022. I guess it's worth noting here, my study is not just limited to 2 specific nation states, but also to a specific time period. So it's a time of the pandemic, and it's also a time where tech companies were hiring a lot of workers. So that maybe that's something we can discuss later on, or I'm sure we will discuss, given that, things have changed in the tech industry, and the field moves so quickly that, I guess any book nowadays really risks presenting a kind of historical analysis in some way. Also methodologically, it's worth mentioning that I recruited primarily mid-level tech workers. So I oversampled tech workers in kind of at the mid-career stage, rather than early career tech workers or senior, more managerial tech workers. My key finding in this study is that tech workers they don't depart from the entrepreneurial self. There's no wholesale renunciation of the entrepreneurial self, yet there is a meaningful transformation that we can make out. So while tech workers still value self-control, flexibility, and self-optimization, there is a new subject formation on the horizon. There are new cultures of subjectivation being cultivated, being practiced, and that's what I want to focus on now in the following, while also revealing the contradictions and tensions in this transformation. Okay, let's put butter by the fishes, as we say in the north of Germany. Let's move on to the empirical findings of my study. So what did I find? Let's dive into the worldviews of tech workers, and let's start with the worldviews. So my book talks about worldviews, professional roles, and lifestyles. So here's one statement by Michael that illustrates a specific worldview that I coined the return of social critique. Michael, a UX designer from the US, tells me, "We are probably in one of the most interesting times. I don't think we've seen this probably since the 30s or 40s, where there's a massive push towards socialism. I read yesterday the average CEO salary grew 1,000% over the last 30 years. The average for workers grew 16%. Along similar lines, Matteo, a data scientist from Germany, tells me, "It bothers me that workers have less and less wealth. If the state doesn't rebalance with taxes, it's going to be a disaster." And Tara, a UX designer from the USA, told me, "I used to think I was conservative, but I really think I am more democratic leaning. just because, I don't know, to me, I choose to be a UX designer because I want to do good things for others. And I'm not seeing that from the Conservative Party here. So what do we find here? What kind of worldview comes to the forefront? Well, I would argue we can see here that tech workers cultivate a binary, a class-based worldview. A lot of tech workers, most for a matter of fact, they have a worldview where there's workers on the one side and there's tech bosses on the other side. So they don't see society as this flat network. Instead, society is considered as this hierarchical system, and the relationship between tech workers and tech leaders is not a harmonious one. It's a conflictive one, and it's one where one side benefits at the cost of the other side. And what we can also see in this worldview is that the artistic critique, as Boltanski and Chapello coined, the dominant normative repertoire of neoliberalism, we can see that justification repertoire is running out of steam. That it's not the fear of alienation that's on tech workers' mind. Instead, it's a social critique. It's a concern about social issues, about social justice themes. So tech workers are concerned with inequality rather than alienation, I find. And what's also notable is that tech workers have surprisingly, overwhelmingly left, liberal, or green political orientations. Now, there might be some interviewer effect, but I really try to stay neutral in the interviews. And also, quantitative studies have indicated that tech workers donate primarily to left liberal parties. So yeah, what we can see here is there are certain there are coherent class-based worldviews, and there's also a certain sense of shared political conviction among tech workers. However, apart from the voting behavior, it seems, or my study finds, that the return of social critique is primarily a discursive and symbolic phenomenon, as it rarely translates into corresponding practices, particularly corresponding collective practices. So when I asked my interviewees if they are members of a union, only 2 of my 52 interviewees told me that was the case, even though most told me they could imagine joining a union. Now, what explains this discrepancy? Well, I would argue on the one hand, it's lock-in and dependencies. So tech workers often live in very expensive habitats like Toronto, London, Berlin, San Francisco, and you have to earn very high salaries to live there. And if you have a mortgage, then it's very tough to exit the industry. And then what I also found is that tech workers appear to be disillusioned with imagining alternatives to capitalism. They seem to be disillusioned with neoliberal capitalism, but this disillusionment takes place in this larger framework, this larger kind of subjective horizon where alternatives to capitalism seem unrealistic and largely unthinkable. Okay, let's move on to the professional roles of tech workers. What kind of occupational identities do they cultivate? How do they align their critical worldviews with their organizational embeddedness in arguably hyper-capitalist economic firms? Well, one mechanism is brokering needs, as we can see here in Dalia's statement. She told me, when it comes to her work, she told me there are the stakeholder needs, which are the business needs, there are the user needs, and then there are the engineering requirements or constraints. And you need to figure out how to balance all of these. And then you see the Venn diagram of stakeholder needs and user needs, and obviously engineering constraints. That sweet spot, which is not very easy to get all the time, is where I try to design for. Another interesting thing about the professional roles of tech workers is that they cultivate a kind of critical techno-solutionism. So Michael, a data scientist from the USA, he told me, I have problems with the sort of application of AI and machine learning right now by large Silicon Valley players that are, happily building their personal biases into algorithms and no end in sight. So what we can see is that tech workers aspire to balance and broker distinct needs in their professional lives. They see themselves as being able to make a difference from within tech firms. They see themselves as almost these diplomatic balancing subjects at work. And then what we also see is that the notion of techno-solutionalism that still researchers apply to tech workers, or that researchers sometimes kind of lump tech workers together with tech entrepreneurs into this one broad category, and argue that this coding elite is techno-solutionist. Well, actually, if we look at tech workers empirically, that's really not the case. So a lot of my interviewees demonstrate a lot of reflective capacities about issues such as bias and discrimination. And I also read with great interest that Kenzo also found this among tech workers in Brazil, that there is this reflection of these social issues of bias and discrimination. And it would be misleading to coin tech workers as techno-solutionist subjects. And I believe it would also be misleading to coin tech workers as tech bros. That might apply to some actors in the occupational segment, but based on my research, it doesn't seem to apply to the majority of tech workers. Nonetheless, there's also here a flip side to this professional role, to this arguably, this new subject formation among tech workers, in the sense that it could also form the basis for yet another spirit of capitalism, one that doesn't build on the appropriation of the artistic critique, doesn't build on the appropriation of a longing for creativity, but instead appropriates the concern for social issues into a superficial discourse, a superficial corporate engagement with issues of diversity. And also, it is worth noting that among tech workers, there are these latent forms of masculinist politics and techno-masculinity, as well as racism. So in terms of the masculinist politics, for instance, I did notice that data scientists, for instance, which is a more male profession, they often classify UX design, which is a more female profession, as less technical. And this classification does also have economic ramifications. So it's worth noting then also finally that tech workers with their professional roles, there are contradictions and there are compromises. So tech workers are compromising their social orientations to some extent to secure their positions in this upper middle class occupational segment. Okay, let's move on to the lifestyles. What kind of tastes, what kind of cultural activities do tech workers prefer? What kind of subjectivities do they cultivate outside of work? That is the final dimension that my book addresses. Now, as with the other categories, my book discusses a number of them, but I want to focus on two now in this brief introduction of my book. And one of them is the lifestyle of mindfulness. Emma, a data scientist from Germany, tells me, I work from 9 to 5, then from 5 to 7, it's like family time. And then afterwards, or maybe depending on if I need to or not, I'll work 1 or 2 hours in the evening. And I only do it if it's necessary. Also, I have friends like in consultancy that work really crazy hours, and I just don't know why they do it. Interesting here, the kind of, the presentation of a lifestyle that's connected with certain boundary making against other upper middle class fractions, here consultancy. Another lifestyle that tech workers cultivate that characterizes them, I argue in the book, is a lifestyle of ordinariness. We can find it in the following two statements. So Josh, a UX designer from the US, he tells me, we talk about what he likes to do on a Friday night. He tells me the ideal night for me, it's like make a big meal, have some friends over, eat, play some board games, have a bunch more people come over. Rachel, when I talk with her about what she likes to do outside of work, she tells me, I like to run, hang out with friends and family and go to concerts. I have a little dog and I like to kind of take my dog on walks and go to like coffee shops and things like that. So what we can see here is that this in sociology still frequently assumed idea that upper middle class fractions cultivate highbrow or exclusive cultural activities. It's not quite the case. So tech workers are keen to highlight that they are down to earth, that they have ordinary, that they enjoy ordinary cultural activities, that they are not that they are don't that they are kind of that they don't culturally necessarily cultivate exclusive tastes. So, and I think it's worth noting that this holds emancipatory potential. So ordinariness does carry the potential to lower cultural boundaries between the middle and working class. And here we can see something that points to a transformation of the entrepreneurial self, which was often associated with this kind of valorization of creativity and singularity, if we follow Andreas Reckwitz, for instance. And then also in the case with mindfulness, we can see a certain departure from the entrepreneurial self. So the entrepreneurial self typically cultivated there was a blurriness between work and life. You were supposed to bleed for your work. Work was supposed to be meaningful, and the 9-to-5 work routine was considered as something limiting and a relic of the past. With tech workers, we can see a revalorization of clear boundaries between work and life, or at least an aspiration to have a differentiation between those two spheres. So there's something going on. There's emancipatory potential also when we turn to the lifestyles of tech workers. We would be misunderstanding tech workers as these holistically market-oriented selves. At the same time, though, there are contradictions here as well, in the sense that mindfulness is a very individualist technique. It's a technology of the self, really, sometimes in a literal sense. And it only challenges neoliberalism from within the epistemic doxa of self-control and self-responsibility. And then when we turn to ordinariness, here again, there's a certain flip side, in the sense that we can identify a latent class reproduction tendency, in the sense that tech workers celebrate ordinariness in the context of pricey and exclusive metropolitan locations. So it's kind of it's a double-edged lifestyle, if you like, and it's also a lifestyle that allows tech workers arguably to avoid becoming the targets of critique while pulling away from a declining middle class in post-Fordist economies. What I mean by this, building on Friedman and Reeves, one can argue that cultivating ordinariness, and in the case of tech workers, even foregrounding ordinariness, can be considered a way to establish authenticity, a way to not appear as an elitist occupational segment, like bankers, for instance, and thereby to avoid becoming the critique, even though their industry is under increasing scrutiny. Okay, let me wrap up. So in conclusion, I would argue that the overarching code, the overarching kind of subjective orientation that tech workers cultivate is the pursuit to be middle class, wealthy, and morally worthy. Tech workers are fundamentally hybrid subjects that try to realize both of these dimensions. And thereby, I argue that we would be mischaracterizing them as entrepreneurial selves, as holistically market-oriented actors, and we would also be misunderstanding them if we labeled them as blunt tech bros. Tech worker subjectivity signals emancipatory potential from within the tech industry, and they signal the chance to shift the power within digital capitalism more broadly, given their inscription power, as well as their crucial in-between middle layered position between tech entrepreneurs and other tech elites, as well as precarious digital workers. Yet, tech workers' social codes are heavily symbolic, open to appropriation by firms, and they're riddled with latent class reproductive tendencies. And therefore, I argue that tech workers are a contradictory class formation. They carry their codes carry emancipatory potential as well as potential for reproduction of relations of domination, and we need to be attentive to both of these processes and this broader space of possibilities that tech workers are navigating. And yeah, I want to close here, and now I really look forward to the commentaries and the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Robert. I really appreciate your nuance and the way you nuanced present the nuances of these tech workers. And obviously, when I was reading, rereading your research, but reading your book, I was thinking of my own research with other specific tech workers and how. I know there are people from Brazil and Argentina in the audience, and how, like in the homeless worker movement in Brazil and in the tech co-ops in Argentina, they always have like contradictions. Some of them are similar that you are presented, even like with different perspective, but I also face some specific. It is interesting that even like within a social movement and within a cooperative, and how they also imagine and or sometimes don't imagine alternatives in that way. Yeah, but happy to talk more about it. We have some questions from the audience, but I would like to pass the word to Lena. And but just a context. I really appreciate the way you reflect on the time and space, or and like geographies and histories of your own research, and you position your own research. And is it interesting that Lena and I are doing a reading group on tech workers because of her PhD dissertation, and we decided to read some books on tech workers in the chronological order. So we started with Gina Navs and Sarita Enrute and Hector Beltran. And there's another one that I don't remember in yours. And it was so interesting for us, not only like seeing the different and like commonalities in diverses around geographies, but also this kind of historical issues, like with different field works in different timelines. So was so interesting for us. So I'd like to pass the ball to Lena.
Awesome. Thank you, Raphael. I love this book, Robert, and I will also add, I initially read your dissertation about a year ago. And it connects to my research as I'm studying, I'll introduce myself. I'm at U of T studying tech workers, hopefully their subjectivities as well, and how they understand, privacy and whatnot in relation to technology. And I also previously was a tech worker. Actually, I worked in data analysis. So I saw myself sometimes a little too much even throughout the book, where I was like, is this about me? And I really appreciate the storytelling element of the text as well. I felt like I could really hear the interviewees, and then also, I could hear the interviewees and then your own thought process, your critical reflection subsequently to that. So the first kind of question I have, in relation to your text, you talk a lot about the entrepreneurial self, this kind of like stereotypical neoliberal ideal in which a lot of folks understand tech workers kind of in relation to the tech bro. But then through the interviews, you're like, okay, it's actually a lot more complex. You identify these different ideal types, the affirmative, reformative, and radical tech worker. And then you also categorize these tech workers through these really specific social codes, across worldviews, professional roles, and lifestyles. And so I'm really curious, especially as I head into working on my dissertation, of how you actually sat down and defined what those codes would look like and why you actually decided to pick them, which codes that you thought were useful, like why pick comfortable exploring or brokering needs, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. Thank you. That's a really good question. I've never gotten that question, so I love that kind of more methodological kind of question, which is great. And yeah, and really interesting that you were a tech worker yourself and are now in academia. So that's interesting. I would say that's usually it's the other way around, right? Like academics go into tech It's nice that it's a revolving door, I guess. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, love to hear more about your experiences in tech. So, but with regard to your question, so well, what I did is I had this theoretical interest, right? If there's something of a transformation of the entrepreneurial self that kind of guided my research and my empirical analysis a bit, in the sense that I focused on those codes in the book, not exclusively. I mean, there's also some codes in the book that don't immediately connect to that theoretical debate if there's something post-entrepreneurial going on. Like, I guess the post-nerdiness I talk about, this kind of idea of being technical but also communicative. It was difficult for me to link that to the debate, but I guess the other codes, I did focus. I guess I focused on reoccurring schemas, reoccurring repertoires that I found in the interviews based on my coding of interview statements. Yeah, and if I found reoccurring statements, if I found repertoires, arguments, positionings that reoccurred again and again, I coded them, and then I developed these meta codes, and then from these meta codes, I then developed these themes that form the parts of my chapter, such as comfortable exploring, which I just encountered again and again, and I thought that was a notion that kind of captured one central typical aspect of tech workers' lifestyles.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because the brokering needs, even comfortable exploring, I think is definitely something I experienced as a tech worker myself. When I joined data analysis, I came from literature. And so you can imagine that there's like that transferability of skills there that I and my coworkers had. So I thought that was interesting, because I agree that there isn't as much conversation happening around that in the literature as of right now. A follow-up question I have to that is, why did you specifically want to interview UX designers? I understand data scientists a little bit more, but UX designers, I was very curious as to why, because, you could look at implementation consultants or, different titles.
Yeah, great question. So at the beginning of my project, I was wondering how do I choose the groups I want to focus on, right? Like, there's so many tech occupations within this occupational segment. And so I ultimately opted for the strategy of contrastive sampling, in the sense that I would argue, and I guess this is debatable, but I would argue that data science and UX design, they occupy contrasting positions in the segment, in the sense that data scientist is a more quantitative, a more male-dominated, and a more back-end profession, while UX design is more front-end, more female, and a more qualitative profession. And so my methodological assumption and strategy is that if I find similarities or commonalities across these two distinct professions in the field, then I can generalize those towards tech workers more generally.
Interesting. Did you consider any other titles? Like, was there a short list? Then you said, okay, let me pick these two.
Yeah. So I thought about doing software programmers instead of data scientists. But then I opted against that, because software programmers, it's such a long established profession. And I thought data science and UX design, they're more these kind of more still emergent profession that's very much connected to the internet industry and to specific work cultures. And I really wanted to focus on that kind of sphere.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I'm hoping for my research to also maybe take a look at product designers, because I think that they have that kind of the same thing as UX designers, where it's like a little bit more qualitative. They do have the technical capacity, and their role is shifting a lot recently. Okay, so my next question, which transitions to a little bit more of, kind of the tensions that you mentioned between tech workers and their internal struggle, where they want to be middle class wealthy, but then also morally worthy. And, you mentioned the interviews that they're sympathetic to unions, but then also most folks were not actually union members because they're moral surfers, perhaps jumping between roles. I'm really curious how you see this tension playing out perhaps in the future, even right now, and what you think it would take for this symbolic worker identity to actually move beyond, the self to this sense of collective action.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I guess it's the $1 million question, right? How can we translate emancipatory potential into collective action? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the book, in the conclusion, kind of, I kind of signal it a bit. I mean, I'm a bit careful about this, because I do see myself as primarily somebody who, or like, I guess a lot of sociologists have embarrassed themselves with predictions, right? So it's a risky terrain to enter. But I would argue probably two things would need to happen. And currently, I don't see a mass tech worker movement, like, or it's at least not taking off. I don't see that, at least in the US and in Germany, or in Europe and the US. I don't see that at the moment, just because, I mean, there are these lock-in effects. The tech industry is hiring less, so there's economic pressures, economic uncertainty, and I guess unions. There are some unions that have established themselves, and there's a tech worker coalition that's been great. And Raphael has written about kind of these cooperatives of tech workers that are kind of spreading across the globe, and so there are these new infrastructures that have emerged in the last couple of years. But I would still argue, from my perception, it's kind of the exception, and most tech workers are still kind of, on the one hand, glued to this individual neoliberal mindset of how can I change things, and not kind of, they're asking themselves, what can I do? And they very rarely ask themselves, what can we do? So this collective mindset doesn't exist yet. So that really challenges a kind of an expansion of the movement. And then on the other hand, though, I think it's not just tech workers that are to be criticized. It's also that traditional unions have not done the best job at mobilizing tech workers, at adapting to their careers, their orientations, their international mobility, their flexibility, their preference for home working for a couple of months here and there. So I think traditional unions need to adapt to this new rhythm of life of this white collar workforce, and they also need to maybe adapt a new language, a new kind of conceptual repertoire, also to connect with them. So I think tech workers need to reflect about their kind of subjectivity and its contradictions, but it's also that traditional institutions like unions, and maybe also civil society organizations, they also need to, on the one hand, be more attentive, more aware that there is this really influential occupational segment there, and then also to develop new strategies to connect to them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that it was really interesting that there isn't necessarily, lots of collective action across tech workers, but I do think that tech workers are, very well connected amongst one another. I think the networking kind of community of tech workers, especially with folks job hopping, has created, this, especially stemming from Silicon Valley, this sub community of folks who kind of all know each other. And so it's not, at least from my perspective, that folks are, don't have that kind of connection and community built already, but that there isn't just as much will, perhaps I should say, to actually put something in place and take the onus of taking that action, especially, if they're hunky-dory cozy in their nice tech job role. Yeah, my last kind of question, before I hand it back to Raphael, is, because I read your initial dissertation, and then this book that you've now published, in which you've, the part that struck out to me the most from what has changed is that you're talking a little bit more about, Trump coming into power, right, after he was, made president from the 2024 election, and how you're kind of looking back on some of your research and saying, well, this might now be kind of outdated because the industry has changed so much, right? So I'm really curious, looking ahead, what do you think the future of tech workers is going to look like in the next few years? And do you have any research plans, focusing on what those futurities might look like?
Yeah, no, thanks for that kind of double question. Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, I'm still curious, sort of where tech workers are heading. I think they are kind of at this crossroad, I would say, where it could go either way. I guess they could opt for assimilating with into the and kind of conforming to the new political economic structure that, especially in the US, is taking shape, or we could possibly see with, I guess, an intensified collaboration between the tech industry and the US government. We could also see increasing possible resistance to that intensified collaboration. I think it's currently not really clear which way it's going. I would probably be slightly more pessimist at the moment, just because there's also, in addition to the political change, there's this AI kind of, there's the focus on AI, and there's tech companies, doing cuts, letting kind of reducing their rank and file, the numbers of their rank and file workforce. So there's this kind of economic pressure in addition to this political pressure or political turmoil. So I think that makes it a kind of tricky combination, and it makes it tricky for workers who kind of favor this kind of, as you said, this kind of comfortable middle class way of life. That kind of dual movement makes it a challenging, it kind of constitutes a challenging conjuncture to expect kind of to expect the rise of a revolutionary subject. I don't think we're going to see that, but possibly there will be, I think, punctual resistance here and there. So I think that will be something interesting to observe how that plays out. And in terms of my future research, I do intend to continue having an eye on tech workers. I do want to zoom out a bit and study maybe the middle class more generally, so different professions in the middle class and how they're responding to political, technological, and economic shifts that we're seeing, including AI and other phenomena. So I guess I want to develop a more comparative, broader account of the middle class in the future, but tech workers will definitely play a part in that study.
That's really interesting. I'm eager to see what you have to say about the middle class, because I also think that's a somewhat understudied, economic class as well. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for your responses. I'll hand it back to Raphael now.
Yeah, thank you, Lena.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Helena. Robert, my first academic love was Pierre Bourdieu. And despite the fact that you say your analysis is clearly based in Bourdieu and Foucault and in Weberian analysis of ideotypical issues, but I see a lot of Bourdieu in the way you say and you read in the way you think methodologically, especially the more ethnographical, even the distinction, the notion of lifestyle. I can see some echoes of that of this book and really appreciate. Now I'll pass about to Kenzo. Hello, Kenzo. Good morning again.
Hi, everybody. So I think one of the challenges of commenting on books that it is always a portrait of the past, of the moment when the research was conducted. And we tend to read it through the lens of present concerns. So my first questions would be about the second Trump administration and about the impact of AI. But you already commented about it. But I would think about three specific dimensions related to the Trump administration, the second Trump administration. The first one is that you emphasize this cosmopolitan dimension of the tech workers' way of life They have this unique international mobility, considering them in compare with the majority of the workers. And you talk about this new spirit of capitalism that is based on the cooptation of tech worker values by the big company, by the big techs. But in a sense, in a very specific dimension, some people consider the Trump administration a post-neoliberal order, in the sense that the neoliberalism was based on globalization as an official ideology, on global value chains, open markets, multi-stakeholder, multilateral governance. And it appears that this order is in crisis. And how tech workers, cosmopolitan and exploration, identity reposition themselves in this new order, where we see the comeback of nationalism, xenophobia, and especially considering the dimension of the visas policy, because the IT industry in the US, and by the way, it's not just the US. If you think about Germany, the AfD rises. It's really terrifying. But the IT industry, it was always based on qualified immigration. I mean, the US history of scientific and technological development was always based on skilled immigration. So I think maybe the visa policies, what do you think of the potential of the visa policies becoming a real, more material issue, like the ones that you advocate, you mentioned in the conclusion of your book, from this shifting from just moral, more broad issues to more concrete related issues for the tech workers movement. And at the same time, just to finish about this question, I think the Trump administration brings this contradiction that it's in the core of techno-solutionism as the official ideology of Silicon Valley, because the problem of the companies co-opting the values of the tech workers, saying, oh, the big techs are going to solve poverty through AI, the big techs are going to fix democracy, we're going to the AI is going to end hungry and people starving in the third world, is that at some point the tech workers can believe in that, but then the big tech has to think about profits, and they are going to adequate themselves to the regime intentions, especially under the pressure of the possibility of regulation and antitrust policies. So, and the one thing, and just to conclude this first idea, I read a really interesting interview with Peter Thiel, that he was saying that the policy of the Trump administration against universities was deeply connected to fighting what Peter Thiel said was the leftist inclinations of the tech workers. Because Peter Thiel said, we can't solve these with layoffs, because everybody in the market right now has these leftist positions. So we have to go to the university where, as your book mentions, these kind of more liberal and identity politics debates are being presented to the tech workers. So if you think about class always as the product of antagonistic relations, how a fraction of the Silicon Valley dirigent, like command, becoming clear hostile to tech workers in this sense, can make a new scenario, the shift from cooptation policies to a more hostile and class struggle perspective, not from the tech workers, but from their boss.
No, yeah, thank you so much for those comments and the questions. Really interesting. Yeah, I'll start with the AI. So we've talked about it a bit, but I think it's definitely worth discussing it more, because I guess something that we might be seeing among tech workers now in the future, it's not so much something I encounter that much, maybe slightly, but is this kind of a possible development of a bifurcation of the labor market segment. So I do think there are signs that, yeah, tech workers are, yeah, being kind of divided into this segment of AI masteries, AI savvy, very AI skilled workers who can use AI to get ahead, to get more done, to improve their position in the organizational hierarchies. And then on the other hand, a certain de-skilling of, yeah, the question is how many, but maybe the lower segments of the occupational segment. So I think that's something to watch out for, because currently, I mean, obviously there are big salary discrepancies. So I interviewed some people who were earning 200, 250, I think one even $300,000 a year. And then I was interviewing others who were earning $60,000, $70,000 a year. But yeah, there was a certain, most tech workers were kind of, in the US, were kind of around something with 100,000. So there was a kind of big middle layer, middle kind of middle earning, well, still well earning, but like the kind of variation wasn't that great. And I think that might be something to look out for if there are these inner divides. And that's crucial because it could block the class formation process of tech workers, right? If there's a bifurcation along the lines of AI, of AI kind of savviness, AI skills, that might block further class formation processes. In terms of the second Trump administration, yeah. So, I mean, interestingly, the first Trump administration, the election of Trump in 2016, it's kind of like this reference point for tech workers, for a lot of tech workers that I interviewed, for why they became more critical and political. It was like this, there was Cambridge Analytica, there was the realization for them that, yeah, tech can have these negative effects. It can it can kind of shift elections, influence elections. So a lot of tech workers kind of reference that as a point where they became more critical of the tech companies and more aware of their responsibilities, given that they have this inscription power. Now, the second election of Trump in 2024, I mean, so far it hasn't led to a more radicalization of tech workers. So it could be, arguably, there's the possibility that due to the pressure and the different kind of economic landscape, that now tech workers might be becoming more conformist again. But yeah, as you say, there are also these issues with their lifestyles being very cosmopolitan, and then the US government restricting visas. So a lot of the policies of the US government at the moment, they do challenge, they do really are at odds with tech workers' lifestyle and political orientations. So it would also be surprising that if we're just seeing pure conformity. And I guess that brings me back to Pierre Bourdieu, who Raphael kindly mentioned, and who has been a big influence. And I guess if we take up Bourdieu and the idea of the habitus, I think we can be a bit more hopeful, in the sense that the whole point of the habitus in Bourdieu is that the habitus it's about these deeply incorporated schemas of perception, recognition, and action, things that are, kind of like a very, that are not just like superficial, ways of behaving, but a habitus is about this core of a social character. And so I think with tech workers, we have, due to their socialization, due to the universities that they visited, the culture there, as you mentioned, Kenzo, but then also due to the culture of the tech industry and the workforce, and this kind of culture that they experienced over several years now, it can be assumed that this kind of led to deeply incorporated schemas of perception, recognition, and action. And these schemas can, at the very least, be reactivated, I would say, once political context change, or they cannot fully be ever kind of put aside. I think they will remain there even if political structures change.
Yeah. So this brings another thing that I think it's really interesting to explore. That sometimes reading the book, I think you connected the majority of the tech workers consider themselves reformists, like they are leftists, but they are reformists, to their position as middle class, of this hybrid position between capital and labor. But Rafael has asked me to bring provocations for this morning. So my provocation would be, but the majority of the proletariat in history was also reformists. The majority of the working class in Europe in the post-war, they were not voting for communists. They were not in communist unions, except Italy, but they were voting for social democracy for almost 100 years, if you consider German, for example. And so who is intrinsically revolutionary in the history? You know, that would be my provocation, because I think no sector of the workers is an island. You know, I think the general configuration of the American society is probably more relevant for the level of mobilization of the tech workers than just to analyze the tech workers movement. What I'm trying to say is, I think it's easier for tech workers to participate in a general strike in Minnesota than to organize a specific strike against a specific big tech company, probably. I don't know. That would be my guess. But because this idea of reformism and middle class positions has a tradition in the Marxist field that you make some dialogues in your book, is the classic concept of labor aristocracy, right? If you go to Lenin, he was studying skilled workers who had better conditions than the general workers because of their knowledge, and they would be more reformist anyway. So I think that is a concept that you don't explicit dialogue in your book, but I think it's interesting. And but the other thing about this, to finish this question, it would be about you have a focus. You are really concentrated on debating unions, right? Because most of the workers mentioned that they would unionize, but they don't. That is a really interesting question that you mentioned. But maybe historically, their political activism was more connected to social movements than to unions. Now, if you think about the free software movement, the anarcho, the crypto anarchists that were kind of always between libertarianism and capitalism. But when we talk about Brazil, many of the movements that Rafael studies and I study, they are more activists than trade unionist organized in their place of work. So what do you think about this, especially because I think that you, and I'm going to conclude this idea. Yeah, you talk about a lot about their inscription power, but beyond the individual moral choices that they make, considering themselves as representatives of the users, what about the struggles that happens inside their work in a daily basis when they see, oh, this tech that we are developing is going to harm the users, or worse, is going to harm the whole society? Maybe they don't organize through unions, through public campaigns against this, but they have this kind of internal clandestine resistance in their offices. So what about this process? They had mentioned this beyond individual choices, but more like with their colleagues inside their offices, if they contest the line of tech that they are developing.
Great questions. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for raising those. Yeah, I love to discuss them. Yeah, so well, I like the provocation. Like, are tech workers that different? Haven't all workers kind of been reformist, or isn't this something that we should be expecting? Is it all that surprising? Well, I would argue yes. I would actually hold against, in the sense that tech workers are, I would say, they're really, like as you said, like they're the labor aristocracy, right? And I would argue we cannot, or tech workers are unique in the sense that they're really one of the few winners of neoliberalism that are very critical of neoliberalism. So I looked at studies of bankers, for instance, and bankers do not cultivate this kind of social critique. They don't cultivate kind of this disillusionment with neoliberalism, and also these critical mindset, and not this aspiration. I think it's fair to critique tech workers for not always walking the talk, but tech workers really want a different society. It's really genuine. I find in my interviews this wanting to work on something that makes a difference, and wanting to alter society in a certain way, and this kind of aspiration and longing, that's something I argue we wouldn't find among bankers, and also not consultants. So among these other kind of big kind of winners of neoliberalism, we can't find those kind of codes. And that's why I think tech workers are so interesting, and also so important to kind of wrestle with, and potentially also engage with, if we look at society more broadly. I agree with you that tech workers are more movement prone than union. So I do spend a lot of time talking about unions, and I agree with you that the natural kind of tech workers, for them, it's a movement is more appealing. It's more kind of, it's more flexible. You can dip in, dip out. I guess here kind of what we can see is this anti-institutional kind of sentiment that tech workers kind of cultivate, in the sense that established institutions, especially established formal institutions, they are kind of, they're considered as legacy institutions. They're considered as outdated, as kind of not the right way to go. So it would definitely be interesting to look more at how tech workers are engaging with movements, and maybe to try that movements should also engage more with tech workers and build something. But I'm kind of, and this might be a personal political conviction, but I am kind of sympathetic of these legacy institutions like unions, and even also professional associations, right? Like I find it crazy that there's really no established professional association of data scientists or software programmers. I mean, they're trying to do that, but if you compare that to doctors, right? You need so much training, and to become a doctor in basically almost any society in the world, you have to conduct these very standardized trainings, and there's this ethical code and all that, and there are these professional kind of bodies meeting and discussing certain developments in the field. Well, if you want to, when you program an algorithm, there's no control, who gets to do that, right? Anybody, if they get hired, they can program these algorithms that have such a big influence on people's very personal private lives, arguably as influential as the profession of medicine. So I think, I think both society and tech workers should reconsider these established institutions of unions and also professional associations to kind of drive change and to improve the development of technologies. And then your final point about clandestine resistance, that things are happening outside unions. Yeah, I agree with you. That's definitely important. And I guess here we can see, here arguably tech workers' social codes matter, even if they're not organized, in the sense that I would agree that in offices, at the workplace, tech workers probably serve and they function as a buffer in a lot of cases. So there's probably tech leadership with certain ambitions and kind of move fast and break things attitude. And I think tech workers are probably buffers, in the sense that they are they're very reflective, caring about data bias. They're kind of very concerned about the quality of data. So I do think, even if they're not organized, tech workers have a lot of potential to buffer certain tendencies that we're seeing in tech more broadly at the moment.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you, Kenzo. We have 25 people watching us, and we have a lot of questions. I'm trying to organize in a group of 3 questions with like similar issues. I'll put on the screen. I feel myself like a TV director putting this question in the screen. First is from Sarah Appelans. How did you define tech workers? Who was included and excluded from that definition? I already put in the chat some like the text by Valentin Nibler, like about the tech worker definition. The second one is from Maria Esther Cervantes. Is lifestyle aspect related to how tech elites don't value those highbrow institutions in the same ways that other elites do? For instance, San Francisco versus New York cultural offerings. And the third one by Ana Paula Moritz. Did your interviews surface any concerns about their work or threats to their lifestyle? For example, the platformization of tech work or fears around AI replacing jobs?
Great, thank you. Yeah. Let me just note that question down.
If you need that, me put
Yeah,
again in
no,
the
it's fine.
screen.
No, it's also nice to have them so I can think about them in the future. Yeah, they're great questions. So Sarah asked the question, how do I define tech workers? I also love the article by Valentin Nibler. So in the book, I define tech workers as professionals responsible for programming and managing digital technologies. So I think professional, the notion of professional is key in the sense that tech workers, for me, are like somebody working in the digital economy is a tech worker if they have some kind of professional status, meaning that they have a task jurisdiction, they have some kind of expertise that is hard to build up. So that's why they typically are able to accumulate higher salaries, is because they have this expertise, this kind of complex knowledge about a certain thing, such as how to run Python or how to run R, how to code on those platforms, while more like kind of lower skilled gig and crowd workers, oftentimes they don't have this complex expertise. They still do really important tasks and they do have a skill set, but it's not kind of a highly complex codified skill set that typically requires long years of training, often in educational institutions. So yeah, tech workers have this kind of professional status, but they still identify as workers, right? That's really fascinating. And I didn't want to call them tech professionals because they actually prefer this classification as workers, but that kind of, is an interesting aspect about them. But of course, the question is a tricky one. Where does the tech industry stop, right? So professionals in what domain? And so here in the book, I argue that the tech industry for me are firms whose business model center on information and communication technologies, specifically also that center around the commercial internet. But of course, this is, increasingly firms, traditional firms, even industrial firms are pushing into this kind of realm. So I guess increasingly the question does come up, is a data scientist at General Motors, is that a tech worker? And I would say, with automobile firms trying to kind of reposition themselves as tech firms, I guess increasingly we have to have that debate. And I think, the tech industry is definitely expanding, and we'll see more tech workers kind of come up in firms that we might have not traditionally associated with the notion of tech. Maria, you asked about lifestyle aspects of tech workers and how they connect to the tech industry leaders' lifestyles. I think this is super interesting. And here I think we can see it's another mechanism, and I didn't mention this in the talk, where we can see how tech workers' codes are kind of, where there's a certain attention in their kind of aspiration to not be part of the elite, in the sense that their lifestyles do echo elements of tech industry leaders. So like Mark Zuckerberg, other tech leaders, they also cultivate a certain sense of ordinariness, right? In the way they dress, this kind of gray T-shirt style, even though that is changing at the moment, right? A bit, interestingly. But I guess there is something, I think there is something worth noting in the sense that it's tech workers' lifestyle and the tastes and also the way they kind of present themselves, how tech leaders present themselves. It's not that different. Like there's not a clear lifestyle distinction probably between tech workers and tech entrepreneurs in a lot of cultural activities. So I think that probably makes it harder for tech workers to form a social class, because you need to have a distinctive lifestyle repertoire. At least if we follow Bourdieu, you need to have a kind of also a symbolic struggle in the realm of lifestyle to really fully form as a social class. So that will make it tough. And then Anna, you asked about AI, and if in my interviews there were fears among tech workers about AI replacing their jobs. So interestingly, between 2020 and 2022, I didn't really find that. So tech workers were quite confident that AI couldn't replace them. They were sometimes making fun of notions like unsupervised machine learning, and they were saying, well, actually, we're still supervising it. Somebody is supervising it. So, and I would imagine even today, if you did interviews with them about AI, they would be skeptical about the big promises around the technology, and they wouldn't echo the kind of solutionist promises that the tech industry leadership is kind of propagating. So yeah, I actually talked with a tech worker last week from Microsoft, and he told me he believes the current job cuts are mainly to save money, to invest that money into AI data centers. And he argues he's not seeing a lot of replacement of tasks of tech workers by AI. He's more seeing it as a kind of, we're actually cutting back and we're not focusing on expanding or improving our services at the moment. And we're instead channeling that money we save by not improving our services into AI infrastructure like data centers. So yeah, but I guess more research is necessary to confirm that hypothesis.
Excellent, Robert. I have a second and final round. I group now the questions around mobilization and collective issues. The first question is by Tanner Mills, and Tanner say, "Congratulations, Robert! Terrific presentation." Tanner Mills here. How might your book's finding about tech workers intervene in the ongoing left debate about the professional managerial class, PMC, started by Barbara and John Aaron Wright, 1976, they say that PMC was becoming proletarianized and precarized despite high levels of education, relatively high wages, and cultural habitus, distinct from the traditional working class. And he compliments saying also the PMC politics were not given, but a terrain of struggle and contestation. While capital and the right actively tries to induce and reproduce middle class identity with discourse into entrepreneurial and professional subjectivities and so on. The labor movement and the left, including unions, democratic socialist organization, and social movements, try to organize those same people into a working class itself. What's your take on the PMC thesis? Are tech workers part of the PMC? Do your findings about tech workers affirm, complicate, or contest it? And a similar line, Jason Calatas from Ireland. Hello, Jason. He wonders how the tech worker movement that happened in the US in 2018, the Google walkout, points to this direction or emancipation. Yeah, I think you have by now, and I have some follow-up questions by Tanner and by Yves Pesania.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for those two questions. Yeah. So or those two kind of sets of questions. So and yeah, the first question. So yeah, I love the debate around the professional managerial class by the Aaron Rice. I guess, yeah, tech workers provide a new. So first of all, I think they had a lot of interesting arguments to say, and I think some of the arguments echo theories of the kind of labor process debate that's been going on for decades. I mean, I would say tech workers are in somewhat like they present a challenge to those theories, in the sense that this is a new kind of white collar segment that has emerged and that has grown significantly in the last 20 years, while jobs are now stagnating. My research, or I mean, I looked at some quantitative figures. So in the US, at the moment, the Computer Industry Association, they find that there's twice as many tech workers as high school teachers, right? So it is a significant segment, you know. I mean, it's kind of an established segment, and even if it's stagnating, it's quite meaningful. But of course, AI may, you know, it is kind of probably responsible for a certain stagnation at the moment, and there is probably de-skilling taking place. So I think those Marxist concepts are they're worthwhile to reconsider and possibly apply to tech workers. So I think a study that engages more with kind of these debates around de-skilling by braver men, or kind of the ideas in the Ehrenreich's book, I think that would be a worthwhile thing to do. I guess, and then specifically maybe tech workers are an interesting case to look at, because they develop the technologies that might lead to their own kind of de-skilling. So I think that puts tech workers in a unique spot, right? Because they develop these surveillance technologies, or they also develop the AI applications that kind of are supposed to kind of automate some of their tasks. So I think that really will be interesting to interview tech workers directly responsible for programming such like technologies, and to hear about their kind of takes on this development. And then the second question about the tech worker walkout in 2018. Yeah, so I mean, that was definitely like one of the climax moments of the tech worker movement. I mean, and Ben Tarnoff, who's, you know, also a pioneer in the field of writing about tech workers from an academic point of view, he really highlights that walkout as a turning point. And I do think it is still like a reference point among tech workers, but it's also, yeah, it is. I mean, it is also tricky, because I think there would be more research necessary. So I interviewed one tech worker at Google, and he told me actually that it was kind of like in the company communicated as like, yeah, you can take the day off and go to that walkout. So I think first of all, the question is, how confrontative was that walkout really, and how much was it really a challenge to the leadership, or maybe was it, you know, Google has a bit of that tradition of kind of cherishing like a kind of certain countercultural movements or ideas. So, and how much was it also tolerated and maybe even encouraged to a certain degree by leadership? And then again, also the question, would that still be possible today, or would it be different? Likely it would be different today. Likely the tech leadership would be more critical. So I think, such walkouts at that scale are hard to imagine today, but it'll be interesting to observe. Again, I'm kind of shy. I'm shying away from making a prediction, as you notice, about where the tech worker movement is heading. But I definitely think the potential is there. But I think it will need more institutional forces activating and channeling that potential. If we don't have them, I fear that such walkouts might remain an historical curiosity and outlier, and not a kind of trend.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert. Tanner said, thank you. Thoughtful reflection on the PMC thesis, maybe your next article. I look forward to reading your new book. And Sarah said, thanks, Robert. There are many parallels between these findings and what I have seen among engineers. Would love to connect with you at some point to discuss. And some follow-up questions by Tanner, like where does the tech industry stop and start, or the definition question about what is a tech worker, and analytical costs and benefits of starting with specific occupational roles in the division of labor instead of blanket terms like tech worker. I also echo that next week we'll have a book talk here in Toronto on Notes Towards a Digital Workers Inquiry by a Capacitor Collective, a lot of amazing researchers, Alessandro Del Fanti, Julie Chen, and Tamara Nees, and Enda Brophy. And and they put from data worker to data scientist under the umbrella of tech workers. So it's so interesting, this debate. And the final question is by Ives Peçanha, from Napoli. He's Brazilian, living in Napoli. In your view, what changes when tech practice and critique of capitalism are developed within social movements rather than within market? And do you see the possibility in this context of less contradictory social codes or alternative moral economies of technology?
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting. So if I understand the question correctly, the question is about, what is the cost, the drawbacks of developing critiques within kind of in capitalist industry? Yeah, would you agree,
Yeah,
Raphael?
what I understood, because I know Ives is researching also with the homeless worker movement in Brazil, is more like when you are in alternative work and militant activist arrangements, if it's less contradictory. I would say that contradictions will always exist, but it's up to you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I mean, I guess there are there are some tech workers who leave the industry. A number of my interviewees at least said that they wouldn't work for big tech companies, so they kind of make these differences within the industry. There's kind of this boundary making going on, symbolic and moral boundary making among tech workers, and are you willing to work for big tech or not? So there's kind of a discourse around this question of in how far it's possible and believable to cultivate critiques from within the industry, and to what degrees. I do think that, and we talked about a bit when we talked about the buffering. I think it's important that tech workers within the industry, even within big tech companies, that they cultivate these kind of ethics. And yes, it's contradictory that they're rarely enacted or enacted in a limited way, but I think it's really important to have those discourses and those ethical debates. And I think we as academics, on the one hand, we need to be critical when tech workers don't walk the talk, and when there's kind of this when it's primarily the moral issues are primarily discursively negotiated and discussed. However, I do think we also need to be careful as academics not to simply fully devalorize that. And I think we would end up, or as political subjects, we would probably end up missing a tech industry that cherishes those moral virtues, even if just discursively. We would miss that if we turn to a tech industry where not even discursively, not even symbolically, we are celebrating kind of the idea of thinking critically about data bias, discrimination, thinking about how to really improve people's lives with technology, or how to develop new technologies in a different way. And also, people that cultivate these economic critiques and social critiques. I think we're definitely better off in a world where there's a symbolic and discursive longing for that, than without any of that. And at the same time, we need to encourage tech workers to translate those concerns. We need to provide them with infrastructures and channels to pursue that. So I think it's definitely would be great to have tech workers or tech experts outside of the industry developing possibly more radical critiques, because that's not possible in the industry. But I think we need those tech workers within the industry. I think they have this. They are kind of in the commando center of the contemporary economy. They hold that inscription power literally in their hands, at their fingertips. And so without them, any meaningful change won't be possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate your talk, your comments. I really appreciate questions, comments, and provocations by Helena and Kenzo. Hope we all can meet in person at some point. And I would like to invite everybody to the next DigiLabour online book talk. Will be next month, March 4th, on Silicon Empires by Nick Chernisak. I probably at that time I will finally learn how to pronounce his name. And we'll have David Nieborg and Helena Martins as discussants for that book. Thank you for everybody who attended. See you there. Bye-bye.
Thank you.